Hi, my name is Sally Rossiter. I am a channel and teacher of the metaphysics. This particular talk was due to take place in South Carolina today, but due to the travel bans cannot do so. It was being hosted at a healing co-op and would have been offered as a free talk. So today we would like to offer it to you out of South Africa, where it is currently being filmed. My work gives me a different perspective on circumstances, both personal and professional and global, and it feels as though it is important to share the information that I'm receiving from Spirit regarding our current circumstances. However, the topic of the talk, which is how to hold your center in political, economic, environmental, and socially challenging times, was actually chosen in November last year and has nothing to do with our current crisis, although obviously everything is perfectly synchronized. In order to better understand our current circumstances globally, not only our current crisis, but the circumstances of challenge and imbalance that we find ourselves in of recent years, it is important for us to understand what is happening or transpiring on a much larger scale. As many of you may be aware of, we are transiting from one 2,000-year karmic cycle into the next. Many thought that this transition would have completed or taken place around 2012. But in truth, 2012 only brought a buildup of frequency which was further intensified over subsequent years. And it was only truly in 2018 that we started to feel the impact of the frequencies of the next 2,000-year karmic cycle. The preceding 2,000-year karmic cycle has only really exited during the course of this year, earlier, or actually from October last year. But these two vibrations, the preceding cycle and the cycle that is coming, sat overlapping with each other for a period of time. And so we felt the duality of both of these vibrations. The purpose of this is essentially our own evolution. This change in 2,000-year cycles is something that is part of a much bigger universal cyclic change, and it gives us the opportunity to move away from the Piscean age and into the Aquarian age. I'm sure that this information is nothing new to anybody. However, it's important to recognize this because it is actually the source of the imbalance and challenge, or rather the challenge that is taking place on the planet. The challenge is further exacerbated because as a society we are going through this change from a position of imbalance. It's important to understand that this cyclic change will not resolve overnight. Although the, shall we say, the greater percentage of energies and frequencies linked to the new cycle are being grounded as we speak, this will still continue for many years to come. The other thing to understand is that this type of cyclic change alters our priorities, our systems, and our structures. And let's face it, they need to change. They are no longer serving humanity, and they are no longer serving our environment. Essentially, the preceding 2,000-year cycle was governed by the patriarch, and the patriarch is often associated with the masculine. However, the patriarch is simply a structure or a system that created structure on our planet and essentially impacted both the masculine and the feminine going forward. It created circumstances for the masculine, turning men into warriors and soldiers, and by doing so disconnected them from their emotional bodies and desensitized them generally as humans. The feminine, by the same token, was impacted through a sequence of events that caused suppression and disempowerment, and essentially tried to victimize the feminine. So both the masculine and the feminine were deeply impacted by the patriarchal systems that existed on our planet. The good news is that these patriarchal systems are leaving the planet. They are done. Their time is up, and you may find residues of them in various societies, but generationally, this won't last more than another 2 generations, and they will be done. When you understand that the next cycle is a 2,000-year cycle, those 2 generations essentially are a very short period of time. It's important to recognize that these governing vibrations, which have influenced our preceding cycle, essentially these patriarchal systems that were created, did one vital thing, and that was to keep the masculine and feminine out of balance. In fact, I believe they were responsible for creating that imbalance. So moving forward into our next cycle, it becomes incredibly important that the masculine and feminine energies on the planet are brought into balance and into harmony with each other, moving away from dominance from either of these vibrations and moving us into a state of equality. When that equality is held within the individual as both masculine and feminine vibration, the same equality and balance is made possible within our societies, in our structures, etc. This rebalancing process is something that very likely is going to take approximately 2 generations. When you think that the cycle itself is a 2,000-year cycle, 2 generations is a very short period of time. And already, if you look at our youth, our teenagers, our young adults, you will see that they are moving away from some of the more dictated roles and allowing themselves to vibrate with the roles that are most suited to their natures as individuals, rather than stepping into preconceived and concluded roles as dictated by society. What this means also is that men and women in society currently need to start reinventing themselves. We need to re-evaluate what it means for ourselves to be a man or to be a woman. And most importantly, we need to start operating from our personal truth, as opposed to the dictated ways of being that society has always impinged on us. This is a process that takes time, but really does bring about balance in the future. That is the plan. Now, all of this, of course, is about manifesting change. And change is something that human beings don't react particularly well to. In fact, human beings don't like change at all. And the reason for that is because of our egos. Our egos tend to want to protect us in times of change and hold on to what is familiar and what is known, purely because there's a sense of safety in that. However, change is natural to us and is something that we need to embrace as a part of our evolution, which is ultimately the purpose why we are on the planet, and that is to evolve. So this type of change basically triggers fear for human beings. And human beings, when they go into fear, are capable of all sorts of crazy things. And we tend to manifest these fears then for ourselves. At this point, I believe it is pertinent for us to have a look at the COVID-19 virus and the pandemic that we are currently experiencing. Something that interested me was to try and understand what the origin of a virus is. What actually is the source of a virus? And it seems as though, although scientists have certain theories, there is actually no specific conclusion in this area. But the three main theories seem to be the first one, that there is the existence of something called circular DNA, which basically moves between cells, transferring genetic information from one organism to another. The second theory is that viruses evolve from other more complex free living organisms like cells or bacteria. And the third theory, which is not really a theory, but rather because there is supporting evidence, is that some viruses are actually millions of years old, dating back to the onset of vertebrates on the planet. But the reality is that whatever the source of a virus is, it is triggered by an imbalance in the virus's environment, whether that imbalance is inside the physical body or whether it is environmental outside of the physical body. It is this circumstance which causes a virus to suddenly become active and start attaching itself in a parasitical way to other living and healthy cells. So in regards to this, basically the information that I channeled around this, and which obviously came from the Great Spirit, supported the understanding or supported the belief that a virus is a result of an imbalance. And when referring specifically to COVID-19, basically that is exactly what Spirit said, and that it is the abuse of our environment, both of our bodies, our psychology, our emotional state of being, our spiritual selves, and also, of course, our environment in the form of Mother Nature. It is these imbalances which are responsible for the triggering of this virus. When I asked Spirit if this virus has a purpose, the answer was no. It is not sentient and therefore does not have a purpose. However, they did say that it had a manifestation and it had an outcome. When I queried the understanding of the manifestation further, they said to me that the manifestation was obviously the connection to what had caused it, which was the imbalance in the environment, and that the outcome was that human beings through this virus are faced with their mortality. Now that in itself is very important, because the fear of death is essentially human beings, or is considered human beings' greatest fear. Spirit, however, was very clear that the process through which this pandemic has unfolded has definitely transpired through manipulation. Manipulation by the powers that be, governments and those powers that are influencing government, the huge multinationals on the planet. And one just has to look at those that have benefited from this virus, and immediately one begins to understand who and what those forces actually are. The crisis seems to, or this manipulation seems to have gotten out of hand at a certain point, and even those that were manipulating seem to have been a little surprised by the outcomes of it, according to Spirit. But essentially, when the fear of one's own demise or one's mortality was triggered, a crisis was created. So we have the virus, and certainly the virus itself is something that needs to be acknowledged, and one needs to respectfully maintain one's physical health as best as possible through all the ways that have been reiterated endlessly through the media and social media. However, we also need to understand that there is a particular intent through the manipulation of our core fear, or one of our core fears, and that intent is about gain. It is about those on the planet who would essentially manipulate human beings in order to benefit themselves. Imagine for a moment what most people on the planet would do who are afraid of death in order to avoid their own demise at this time or to extend their lives a little longer. There are great lengths that people will go to in order to preserve themselves and their physical existence. The reality is that death stalks us constantly, as Carlos Castaneda so beautifully demonstrated in his writings. The truth is that tomorrow is promised to no human being, and death can happen for us in any form at any time. And it is something that, when we truly understand this, does not trigger further fear in us, but rather helps to bring us to a deeper sense of value of our physical existence. When we operate from a position of fear, we need to understand then that we become irrational, and we essentially then will go to those great lengths in order to preserve our lives. Many global organizations and governments have benefited through this pandemic, and they're very good at blaming one another. But in truth, anybody that has gained has essentially participated in the perpetuation of that fear on our planet. Keeping in mind that human beings are vulnerable to their fears right now because of the incredible cyclic change that we are going through all over the world, and in fact is reflected on a much larger scale universally. So we could say that fear of our own mortality is what is currently driving this pandemic, and those that are feeding it are once again prioritizing gain, generally of a monetary nature, over human life. So when I asked Spirit more about the outcomes of this circumstance and what does it mean that human beings are facing their mortality, what does that mean for us in the long term? Spirit said to me that some people will be permanently changed by this in a very positive way. They would understand better the gift of their own existence, the value of our existence as a species, and generally have more respect for life, their own, others' lives, and of course the life of everything that exists on our planet. However, some people will sigh in relief as this passes and will simply carry on as they did before. This is their choice. Human beings have this incredible gift of free will, and if that is how they choose to continue living, then they're entitled to do so. There are also those who will embrace change, but unfortunately will not sustain it. And so they will make positive changes, perhaps becoming more self-sufficient in their way of living, perhaps valuing their lives, their homes, their children, everything that they have in their lives that brings richness to them, but they will not be able to sustain it over an extended period of time, and eventually will return to their old ways. But the most important thing that Spirit mentioned that we should be aware of as we come out of this is that we need to understand very clearly the power of the group consciousness, its impact on us, the impact of media and social media on the group consciousness, and how human beings are controlled by it. There is not a single person on the planet that has remained unaffected, even if it is by having other circumstances and other people's choices in turn impact them, that has remained unaffected by this pandemic. And the pandemic, as we have now understood, you have the disease, the virus, and then you have the consciousness that has been created around it. And it is that we must be aware of, because the imbalance that we are currently experiencing in our environment and in ourselves is not going to disappear overnight. This type of imbalance, and added to it this incredible cyclic change, will perpetuate other circumstances of extreme nature on the planet in the years to come. One could say that if we allow ourselves to be driven by fear, we start to create viruses of the mind. And we can step away from that. We can overcome it. I'm going to talk to you more about that as we go on with the talk generally and move away from COVID-19 specifically. And the simple way of doing that is to operate from our individualized personal truth and to stay away from the group consciousness and its various manifestations. We need basically to be able to live through whatever crises we experience or whatever manifestations our imbalances create as we transition from one cycle into the next. We need to be able to live through them as harmoniously as possible and remain reasonably unaffected. And essentially that is made possible by our identity with our soul self. Wrapping up on the current pandemic, we will survive this. We will move beyond it as a society. However, there will be other crises, and so it is important for us to be able to manage ourselves well and to function from a place of centeredness going forward. The first thing we need to realize or recognize or remind ourselves of perhaps is that we live in a world of duality. There are two main frequencies here, fear and the other is love. When we operate from fear, we align ourselves with many of the experiences which are fear-based and like our current pandemic. When we operate from love, we step away from fear and we are able to experience a different type of experience, even if the circumstance is identical. So we actually get to choose whether we want to function through love or fear. This is not random. And the moment we recognize that we have a conscious choice in regards to these two vibrations, we have the power to understand what we are aligning ourselves with and what we are wanting to experience in the world going forward. When we unconsciously identify with what is happening in our environment and with our human selves, then we are automatically impacted by the fear vibrations around us. But when we identify with our internal self, with our soul self, we are more inclined to identify with the love vibration and to allow that to be the place from which we perceive all of our experiences. So it's important for us to recognize that when we try to take our sense of security from outside of us, whether that is in our relationships, through our jobs, through our financial circumstances, through our societies, the place we live, our environment, etc. While we are moving through so much change, both socially, politically, economically, and environmentally, we will find no sense of safety there. There is no security to be found outside of us. Rather, our sense of security must come from within. And through recognizing that and accessing it, we find centeredness and peace. So how do we do this? Meditation, introspection, all the tools that take us within would have immense value at this time and in the future in helping us to align with our internal nature and to take our identity from that place. We basically need to reconnect with our spiritual nature. People don't often recognize that the energetic world and the spiritual are the same thing. but in truth they are. And it is when we connect with ourselves from an energetic perspective that we are able to experience our spiritual selves. This is something that makes it possible even for those who are not religiously orientated to recognize the value through science of acknowledging ourselves purely as frequency or as energy. When we do that, we are able to achieve the same result as when we acknowledge our spiritual nature. We are able to experience ourselves as the consciousness that dwells beyond the personality, the ego, the inner child. We are able to recognize that we are the consciousness that exists beyond our body, our minds, our emotions. We are the light, the consciousness that drives the physical human, the emotional human, the mental human. We essentially are what animates our existence. So going through the process of understanding our internal identification and aligning ourselves with our soul self can take years. There are simpler ways in a more urgent circumstance to disidentify from the environment and to bring ourselves into a better state of centeredness very quickly. And those are what I would like to talk to you about. They do support us recognizing that we are the consciousness that animates our physical lives. The first thing we should look at is group consciousness. So what is group consciousness? As soon as you have two or more people, a group consciousness is created. It is where beliefs, thoughts, ideas, etc. are shared, usually in a very unconscious way or a subconscious way. So you would have the group consciousness of various professions. So for example, all lawyers have a group consciousness. You would have the group consciousness of races, of the different sexes, both masculine and feminine, have their own group consciousness. And each of these larger group consciousnesses have various pockets associated with them and various beliefs and so on, which subconsciously influence everybody linked into those various types of group consciousness. If you can imagine a group on the planet, there is a consciousness linked to it. I find that it is interesting that we are being discouraged from creating or being in groups while our current pandemic unfolds. And because there are smaller group consciousnesses that are created in those circumstances, and we're being encouraged to stay singular or stay family orientated so that we function through more of an individualized consciousness and or family consciousness. It's interesting because I take you back to the perception or the information that Spirit supplied that the current manipulation of our group consciousness got out of control. Nobody expected it to spread as quickly as it did, or for human beings, 7-odd billion of them, to all suddenly step into fear-type behavior. So keeping us out of groups in order to support the non-contamination of the virus is also supportive to us stepping into individualized consciousness and moving out of fear. So we understand what group consciousness is. The first time I was exposed to group consciousness or taught about it by Spirit was more than 20 years ago, where I was shown that the current group consciousness, the fear-based one, was created more than 200,000 years ago and has been used as a tool of manipulation to essentially keep human beings well controlled, you could say, or influence us in certain directions. The amazing thing is several years ago, I'm taking my mind back, probably 4 or 5 years ago, Spirit told me that we needed to start creating a new group consciousness. Spirit explained to me that the new group consciousness was being created at that time and continues to be created by light beings all over the world, being people who are living consciously, living with awareness, and were making the choice to operate through their individualized truth. The process of operating through individualized truth was very important because it meant that we were connecting to our higher minds, our higher awareness, in order to make those decisions. So they also explained to me that within time, individuals would eventually form a group consciousness once there were a sufficient number of people who were doing this. That point was reached in late 2018, where we essentially achieved a type of critical mass, making possible the formation of a new group consciousness. The bulk of humanity, probably about 92% according to Spirit, still functions through the old group consciousness. So when enough people link together, that 100 monkey phenomena becomes relevant. And it's a tipping point whereby many other people begin being influenced. And I'm sure that for those who have been living consciously, you will recognize how many more people on the planet have woken up in recent years, recognizing the need for us to function differently in the world, to be more aware of our actions, our thoughts, our words, and our impacts on our environment. So the new group consciousness has been created, and Spirit said to me that eventually the current old group consciousness, which is still functioning through fear, will become so intolerable that people will leave it needing desperately somewhere else to connect into. And when that time comes, the new group consciousness is available to them as something to link themselves into automatically. And so this work has been done, and this has been created over the last 30 odd years, preparing for this time. This time that we are living is not random. It is not unexpected. It has been prophesized. Preparations have been made. Humanity is not being left to its old and own devices, but rather there is a plan in place. And it's important that people understand that there is a plan, and that plan supports a life of balance, a world of harmony. It is the very least that we can do for our children. So aside from our practices of strengthening our relationship with our internal nature, meditation, introspection, etc., it is important for us to disconnect from the current group consciousness and to start functioning through our individualized truth. I will facilitate at the end of the talk a short meditation, a visualized meditation, assisting in the disconnection from group consciousness and showing you how it is done. The other thing that is incredibly important is the need for us to keep our heart centers open, our heart chakra open. The heart chakra is the chakra that is connected to the center of ourselves. And yes, it enables us to connect or operate through the vibration of love. However, it is also the chakra through which we connect to the consciousness of our soul selves in a very individualized and direct way. So by keeping the heart chakra open, we are able to better choose to stay in the vibration of love, and we are also better able to recognize what our individualized truth is in any given situation. We will again work with that a little bit more in the meditation, but just simply to say to you, that when we want to ask ourselves or to recognize what our individualized truth is in any given situation, we simply need to ask ourselves that question. What is my truth in this circumstance? If we listen to the mind will inevitably give us a story. It will tell us why, how, who, what, excuse me, etc. Whereas if we listen to our heart for the answers, we will inevitably receive either a single word or a feeling, something that is direct and to the point. And it is inevitably the truth that if we follow through with, following it through an action or an attitude or through a conversation, we will start aligning ourselves with our truth and will function from that place in ourselves. So the question simply is, what is my truth in this situation, whatever that situation is for you in that moment, and listening to the answer from your open heart. So we'll work with that, and I will show you how to connect with it in a moment. The other thing we need to be aware of is that the solar plexus chakra, which is the chakra that sits below the heart and is the first chakra relating to our human self, and our physical manifestations of our physical, mental, and emotional bodies, is the chakra through which we inevitably take on or are affected by other people. So when, for example, the environment goes into fear, we feel it through our solar plexus chakra mostly. So keeping this chakra closed at various times when we start to feel overwhelmed by the feelings of fear around us or by opinions and perceptions which don't serve us, we simply are able to do so by closing that chakra. Closing the chakra is very simple. We breathe in through the chakra, imagining that as we inhale, that chakra closes like the shutter of a camera. Again, I will utilize that imagery in the meditation to help you to better understand or to be able to implement it as a simple visualization. So let's look at the 3 or 4 things we've discussed as being the possible way to correct and to aid ourselves in remaining connected to our individualized truth, our individualized center. The first thing is to work with our meditative practices, internalization, introspections, etc., including, I might add, forms of creativity. So that is the very first thing. We need to do this for ourselves as often as we can. The second thing is to keep ourselves disconnected from group consciousness and connected into personalized truth. When we operate from personal individualized truth, we are able to hold our center and stay disconnected from the group consciousness in future times of crisis. The third thing we need to do is to make sure that we keep our heart chakra open. When our heart chakra is open, we are able to hear our truth, and we're able to function from that place in ourselves with greater ease while remaining in the frequency of love. The other and final thing that we need to do then is to keep the solar plexus chakra closed intermittently as required. Our chakras are energy centers on our body, and by managing them through opening and closing them at various times and determining the degree to which they are either open or closed, helps us to manage the engagements with the world around us and to manage our own vibration and what we put into the world with greater ease. There is a difference between closing a chakra and deactivating it. Our chakras should always remain active, thereby reopening at any given time as is required naturally. However, the opening and closing of a chakra in that shutter-like manner that I have mentioned is supportive of good energy management. I would like to facilitate for you now a short meditation that will assist you in managing your energy and your vibration better as we move forward. So please seat yourselves, make sure that you are comfortable. It is often better not to do a meditation lying down because of the risk of falling asleep. But a nice little trick is that if you are feeling very tired, lift your chin when you meditate, and if you are feeling mentally very active, drop your chin when you meditate. That will assist you in either becoming more introspective or less likely to fall asleep. Take your position currently of comfort in a seated state and close your eyes. You can have your legs crossed in a yogic position, or you can sit with your feet touching the floor. Now very gently, once your eyes are closed, bring your awareness to your breathing. Focus on the movement in your abdomen, in your belly. Notice how your belly expands and contracts to support the movement of your diaphragm as you inhale and exhale. Now imagine on the floor next to you is a big empty box, and into that box please download anything that could distract you. Thoughts, issues, emotions, energies, discomforts. Breathe everything out of yourself and into that box, emptying yourself. Know that you can take anything from that box when we are finished, but for now you can just let things go. Once you have emptied yourself, in your mind, please address Spirit. Ask Spirit to show you the energy of the group consciousness. Ask that you see it outside of you as though you are looking at it. It may present itself as shape, as color, as imagery, however you perceive it is absolutely fine. Now ask that you are shown where the group consciousness is impacting you in your body or in your auric field. Ask to see these impacts as cords of energy. Check the front of your chakras, check under your feet, and of course the back of your chakras, the back of your body, the top of your head, etc. Once you are able to understand and perceive where you are being impacted, I want you to imagine that you have something sharp, scissors, a knife, a sword, whatever works for you, and sever those cords. Essentially releasing yourself from the influences of the current fear-based group consciousness. Once you have done that, there will be little stumps of energy remaining in your physical aura or in your energy field. Now I want you to instruct your aura to spit those stumps out Once that has happened, whichever areas those stumps were sitting in, fill those areas with light. Imagine light flowing in through your crown and into those areas, filling them so there are no gaps in your auric field. And as you do that, make a choice in yourself, stating, I choose to operate through my individualized truth from this point forward. Once you have filled those areas with light, I'd like you to bring your awareness once again to your crown chakra, breathing light in through your crown, through the top of your head, and breathing it out of the center of your chest. Do that a few times. Expanding your heart chakra. You don't want your heart chakra to be so large that it is as wide as your shoulders, but rather the size of a fair dinner plate would be an acceptable size. When a chakra is too expanded, it becomes a little like a vacuum cleaner and we experience everything around us. But when the chakra is well sized, we manage it easily. We are able to externalize well from ourselves without being impacted by what is around us. So keep the heart chakra open around the size of a dinner plate. Now bring your awareness to your solar plexus chakra, the chakra that sits below the heart. And as you focus on that chakra, imagine that you are inhaling through that chakra, and as you do, the chakra seals itself like a shutter on a camera. If you feel the need to do that several times, you can, knowing that that chakra will open itself as it needs to in given circumstances when you need to externalize through it. But by closing it, it will remain that way either until it naturally opens or until you are ready to breathe it open yourself. By closing this chakra, you minimize the impact from the energies and the people around you. Now very gently, just become aware again of your body. Become aware that you are once again seated. Feel the seat against your skin, against your body. Feel your feet on the ground if you are sitting with your feet on the ground. Become aware of your physical self. Breathe your consciousness downwards towards your feet, and as you do so, choose to be present in your body. When you are ready, you can open your eyes. I hope you enjoyed the meditation. In closure, I'd like to just remind you that everything in this world is transitional, and the changes that we are experiencing are also transitional. We will move beyond them. The greater changes of the cycles that transpire on our planet and in the universe will take longer to settle, but nevertheless they are times of adventure and excitement in which we are living. They do not have to be times of fear. Remember to keep your heart open and to keep yourself in the vibration of love. I'd like to thank you very much for downloading my talk, for sharing in this information with me, and for allowing me to share some of what I have received from Spirit with you. Thank you so much, and it is with great love that I leave you at this time.